Kobayashi, and I really love classics. I'm pretty sure anyone that is on this channel for any length of time will have known that. However, these are the top 10 books that I'm ashamed for not reading and also make me feel like a fraud for not reading. Like, how could I say classics is one of my favorite genre and not have read these books? It's embarrassing. People who hate classics have read these books. First and foremost, I'm going to do two books that people might not know as well. The first one would be The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. This is not The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. I have read that book, and I'm sure it is not nearly as good as this book will be. But this book characterizes a man who, because of his race, feels like he is invisible in society and to opportunities and the way that he wants his life to go. And as someone who really loves reading about minorities and the struggles of the oppressed, this is a book that I really should have read by now. 2. The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I only heard about this about a year ago or so, I think, so it's not quite as shameful. But this is a book written by Sylvia Plath who dealt with mental illness throughout her life and actually eventually committed suicide. Her story of suicide and her family is very sad. However, this is a story based on her own life and tells about a young woman dealing with mental illness in the 20th century. And since mental illness is very close to my heart, as well as being talked about during a time where it wasn't talked about enough, I want to read this book very badly, and I need to get to it. Number 3, Alice in Wonderland. I know! I had dyslexia, which meant I didn't start reading until the age of 12. I didn't read a lot of children's books, and when I did start to read, I was at the age where I was reading teen books. I wasn't reading classics. I thought classics were cool and I would like search them out and look at them, but until the last few years I hadn't read a lot of them. I just knew their stories. This book I bought in August of 2017, so I really should have gotten to it now. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This is a book about banning books and lighting them on fire because literature and knowledge sucks in this world. It's a dystopian. I actually know the least about this book, but it's one that has intrigued me and I think it's really important to read. And I encourage other people to read, so I should probably read myself, right? Hypocrite, I know. Number 5, 1984. I have an excuse for this book because I didn't own it until Christmas, but it's also been 6 months, so I should have picked it up by now. This is an amazing book that deals with censorism and all kinds of wonderful things, and I want to read it. And people have spoiled it because they just assume that because I talk about classics all the time, that I know about classics. However, my class did The Great Gatsby instead, which I love, so I'm glad that I read that. However, I'm very sad that I won't have the opportunity to dissect within class because I think that would be very interesting. I am like the only human being I think ever who always loved the school books and always wanted to read more school books. I wish my high school had had an AP program. And then Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This is a book that I thought was really cool and I've wanted to read for a long time. And I know the story. I've watched the movie. That doesn't change. She is such a powerful woman, and I know that, and I need to read this book. The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I know this book isn't very popular. Like, it is popular, but people, like, notoriously say it is boring and terrible, and, you know, doesn't have the greatest ending. However, I want to read it because I think it's a really interesting premise. When I was in high school, my friend read it and was telling me about how awful it was and all the things that were awful, and I was like, please tell me more, I like that. I'm interested to find a copy of this somewhere and read it, because I can take classic books from the library, but I really like annotating them. Then I have The Handmaiden's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I should be revoked my citizenship because this is a disgrace. I don't want to live anywhere else unless it's maybe Europe or Asia. This is the classic of Canadian literature, and I haven't read it. I haven't read anything by Margaret Atwood, which is a disgrace. A story about women's rights, it has feminism, it has everything that I love in it. I have gone into like every used bookstore and like scoured the pages, but for some reason it's not there, probably because people love it so much that they don't give it away. Then I have Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This is a book that I need to read. I know I'm gonna hate the main characters because everyone hates the main characters and I hate pretentious and terrible human beings, but I'm excited to read this book. And it's a classic, and I need to read it. Like, honestly, this is a disgrace. I don't have a right to talk about classic books anymore, because Wuthering Heights is a book that everyone has read. I need to prefect this with saying one of my favorite times in history is the French Revolution. That era is wonderful. I can quote most of Napoleon's history and tell you in detail about the French Revolution in timeline. I am a huge history nerd. However, I have not read A Tale of Two Cities. I have read some of this book, mostly because it's really, really old and I'm like afraid that I'm going to damage it when reading it. I have read part of it, and it was beautiful. I have sat here multiple times and just read the opening. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity, it was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, and we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on it being received for good or for evil in a superlative degree of comparison only. And that is so beautiful, and I read it so often, and yet I have not read the actual book, which is a disgrace. Now that I've shown myself to be a complete fraud while talking about classic books, I am going to continue to talk about them in my other videos, and hopefully get to these books real soon, because they sound all freaking amazing. Anyways, happy reading and writing. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like, and I'll see you next video.